Hi, I'm Mark Shamma'a, and I'm going to talk to you about a methodology for doing a workplace strategy. So, when we talk about workplace strategy, we're thinking of two main elements. One is data, which on its own constitutes a study rather than a strategy, and only becomes a strategy when you engage with the people to understand what their vision is and what the readiness for change is in the organization. And when I talk about readiness for change, I mean at an organizational level, I mean at a leadership level, and I also mean at the people level. Once you have established your data and your engagement pieces and you've got your reports for those done, you can start synthesizing that data together and develop a strategic brief. So that's what the high level picture looks like. If we dive into a little bit of detail, let's look at the data. When we talk about data, we'll need an operational team kickoff. This is where we sit down with those who have been charged with delivering this process on behalf of an organization. We confirm the brief, we understand how we're going to collect the data, we validate the drivers and the objectives of the organization, how that organization came to the realization that it needs a strategy, a workplace strategy, and understanding any program details and logistics matters that need to be addressed. We can then start deep diving into the different elements of the strategy. On the one hand, there's a supply side study. How much space do they have? How are they using it? How many desks? How many meeting rooms? How many offices? How many? If they have a training suite? If they have other special functions such as an innovation center or a client experience center, maybe archive storage, and so on and so forth. So that's the kind of on the supply side. How much space do they have today, and how are they using it? On the demand side, it's how many people do they have? And also that overlaps with the supply side because the demand side is how are they using the space, and the supply side is meeting that demand in a certain way today, whether it's meeting it optimally, well, obviously not because they need a strategy, but how might we improve that process? We also need to understand the organizational structure and processes that drive the business forward. No two organizations are ever alike, and they're structured in very different ways. Different business units may want to have adjacencies next to each other, and some may absolutely not want that. They may have the so-called Chinese walls between themselves and other parts of the organization, and therefore we need to be aware of that when we're laying out our strategy in more detail. There may also be detailed deep dives into aspects of the organization. For example, we might need to do an occupancy study or a utilization study. Occupancy is really how many people are in there, and utilization is an observation of how people are using the space firsthand. We might also be looking at a sustainability review or a deeper dive in terms of a study, and similarly a technology review or a deeper dive in terms of a study. And increasingly we're finding that workplace strategies are asking for a sustainability review and a technology review. But how comprehensive such reviews are and how to what extent they become studies or strategies in their own right, that kind of varies from organization to organization. But that's the essential spectrum of the desktop data that we need to study, and that gives us a kind of an empirical understanding of the organization and what I would call hard and quantitative data that would be reported. So in practice, no one should be able to argue with it. These are the facts. And on its own, this study should tell us what the art of the possible might be. We can go from do nothing to go completely nuts and make a massive transformation of the organization. All of that on paper would be possible, but only if the people buy into it. So that brings us to the engagement piece. Here, the first thing to do is to engage with the leadership, perhaps a kickoff session with the leadership to get an alignment on what it is we're doing, level setting of expectations, an alignment on what the drivers are of the program, what the leaders see as the objectives and success criteria of the organization. Now, these may be different from what we see from the operational kickoff. So, for example, if we're talking to people who are responsible for managing real estate in the operational kickoff, in the leadership team kickoff, we're talking to the CEO and the board of directors and trying to get an alignment on, do they know what we're doing? Do they understand the terminology? Are we all on the same page? And so actually the operational and the leadership piece, you need to be on the same page together, but they are distinct. Sometimes the two get conflated. Not a good idea in my experience because we don't cover the territory we need to if we have a single kickoff session with all parties involved or only some of the parties involved. But there we go. Moving on, we will then get into the more detailed aspect of engagement. Leadership interviews are usually conducted one-to-one, sometimes one-to-two or one-to-three. That becomes more of a leadership discussion. But really the idea is to get a sense from the leadership of what their views are on the program, on the ways of working, on the future of the organization. At a senior leadership level, it's that top-down, looking at the horizon, what's going on. And at a next level down, managerial or department head level, how does your business unit, how does your organization actually work? So that's the top-down element. Bottom-up, online people survey. So asking the people themselves, what do they think is great about this organization? What's great about the culture? What could be better? What could be changed? And it's always interesting to see to what extent the leadership views are aligned with those of the people in the online staff survey, and to what extent they're misaligned. A alignment is great because then you know where what doesn't need to change, but misalignment is also great because then you understand where the different perspectives are and how they align or misalign. An online survey only gives you a two-dimensional response rate, so you need to kind of get into the focus groups to put some color to the black and white responses from an online people survey, which is why those two are shown connected here. The focus groups will sort of say, in the survey, those who responded said X or Y. Could you please put some color to that? Could you please explain what that means to us who are the consultants who want to better understand how your organization works? Focus groups do that, and ideally we should have a focus group of perhaps groups of 15 people, which are manageable, and as many of those as possible to get as many people involved in the process so they can buy in to the program and feel that they have genuinely contributed to the findings. The last one shown here are the change enablers. Now, the change enablers are HR, IT, corporate real estate, and possibly one or two other key enablers, such as a sustainability person or a culture person or a corporate communications person, that kind of thing. But typically it's HR, IT, and real estate. And they may or may not be represented in those leadership interviews, but we draw them out here to show that they are actually significant people we do need to talk to specifically to understand the impact of an organizational change such as this, what it might have on their policies, on their processes, and to what extent they've already made progress in some of these dimensions. So we'll bring all those findings together in a soft or qualitative data report. It's an interpretational analysis. What we heard from you is X, Y, or Z, and how that all fits together. And when we bring those things together and synthesize them into a single consolidated report, that's where the strategy starts to take place. On its own, the data piece is a study, and on its own, the engagement piece is an assessment of readiness for change. Only when you bring them together do they become a strategy. The data section is the art of the possible, and the engagement section is the art of what is acceptable to leadership and what might be desirable to the people. So think about it in these terms. What's possible is data, but what is acceptable and what's desirable is something about engagement there. You synthesize it together, get a long list of options, put them to the leadership to discuss and say, these are what we think. Options A, B, and C seem likely based on what we've heard. I typically say, look, you know your organization better than we ever will, but we think based on what we've studied in the data section and what we've understood from the engagement section, we believe these are the likely outcomes for your organization. Options A, B, or C, and we would suggest perhaps option B. And the leadership will say, well, you've missed a detail here, you've got an idea here. Maybe it's something B with an element of C, or B with an element of A, or maybe something completely different, D, because circumstances have changed. So that's the kind of conversation that happens at that level. We then narrow down that shortlist and present that kind of narrowed down option, or the preferred option. So what we're effectively recommending is what they've told us is acceptable to the leadership and may contain elements of what's desirable for the people. And we drive that into a consensus session and prepare the strategic brief itself, which is the key output of this process. That will cover certain items such as reiterating what the vision for the organization is and what the strategic objective is, as well as the business case, including the timing, the cost, the benefit analysis, and the cash flows that might be implicated in the process. But we'll also be making recommendations if there's a change of property or a change of location, or size of footprint. We'll be briefing the transaction managers, so there's a brief for them. There'll be a brief for the design team to say this is the kind of space they need in terms of qualitative aspects, which have come out from the engagement, but also the quantitative component, how many workstations, offices, meeting rooms, and so forth will be part of that design team brief. There may be some information sharing with an FM team to say, look, this is the aspiration for perhaps a greater people experience component in the new workplace, and there will be a change management roadmap as part of that strategic brief, saying these are what we've seen from our engagement as being the enablers or the levers of change, and these are what we see as being the blockers of change. And that is an insight that we will have received through that engagement process. So those two kind of come together, and the last piece here in the equation is the next steps. What are we going to do about this? Are there implications for a wider portfolio strategy, not just for the one property that we may have looked at, but for multiple properties across the region? And what about the implementation of a change management program in order to realize the strategy? Because just because people have contributed to the strategy doesn't mean they've necessarily fully accepted it or bought into the outcomes. They've contributed it. It's the first step in that journey of change. So we'll need to spend more time with the people holding their hands through that transition process. So that gives you a kind of high level understanding of what a workplace strategy is. It requires both data and engagement to develop a strategic brief and to synthesize that. Without the engagement, it's just a study and the art of the possible. And on its own, the engagement tells you what's desirable or what's acceptable, but may not actually give you the hard numbers that you're looking for in terms of a strategy. So thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed that. And if you have any comments or want to get engaged in a debate or a discussion on the topic, I'd be more than delighted to be part of that. So please do so. Thanks very much for listening.